Meanwhile, pressures grow on the former newsreader Huw Edwards to give up his salary. The BBC is now asking him to return more than £200,000 as they accuse him of acting in bad faith. Their board say he's undermined trust, but taking his wage since his arrest in November, despite knowing he'd plead guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
Well, joining us now is former BBC presenter Danny Kelly. Danny, thank you very much indeed. I mean, when people found out that Huw Edwards had been receiving his very large pay packet, despite everything that's been going on for him and at the BBC, I think most people were quite shocked. This man was on an absolutely enormous salary. Do you think there will be enough pressure on him now to actually think, you know what, I'm going to hand that back?
Who knows? I don't know whether the slime ball that is Huw Edwards has an ounce of humility, embarrassment or shame in his body. Who knows what's going on in his head? What should have happened in November when the BBC were tipped off by the Met Police, I think it was the Metropolitan Police, that he'd been nicked for the child indecent images? They should have just said, look, Huw, we're suspending you without full pay. Now, listen, we know that you're not at this point guilty. You've merely been arrested. You haven't even been charged. But unfortunately, it's not like you've been nicked for drink driving, or maybe you've been nicked for having a pack of cocaine in your pocket. This is so serious. We are now stopping payment. And if indeed the charges are dropped or the arrest it turns into a de-arrest, we will, of course, we won't tell anybody. We'll keep it stum because that's what they did until some months later, and then we'll reinstate you and we'll pay you back your dough. I think it's incredibly important for public trust that either he gives them the 200 grand back, but also, Emily, I think that the BBC should go after him. I don't know where he stands in law, whether he is compelled to give him the 200 grand back. When I was a presenter at the BBC, there was a clause in my contract that said if I brought the BBC into disrepute, they could boot me out. Now, obviously, retrospectively, that's what he's done. So I don't know whether they can go after him retrospectively, but I don't know what's going on in his head. I can't put myself in the shoes of someone who sends indecent images of children. So God knows what he thinks is morally right.
Yeah, the BBC has insisted this afternoon that if Edwards was upfront about the charges that were being brought against him, they never would have paid him his salary past November since his arrest. So do you think the board were a little bit blindsided by all of this?
It's my understanding that in November, the police approached the BBC and told him exactly what was going on. So I don't think they were blindsided by anything. Again, I take you back to an earlier point I made. It's so serious. This is one of the most serious crimes that anybody, bearing in mind the history of the BBC and the scandals and the cover-ups and the public perception, I think that they should have said, OK, on this occasion, this is so significant. Unfortunately, and we know that you're unwell because you've been signed off with mental illness. We know you're unwell, Huw, but we are going to have to make a stance. It's so significant. So I don't think anyone was blindsided. The only people that have been blindsided are the public, are the licence fee payers, because, of course, nobody knew anything until recently.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that the BBC have taken this long to issue a statement like this. But we shall see what happens. It'll be interesting to see if there's some kind of legal battle now between the BBC and Huw Edwards over this money. We will find out, I'm sure, in due course. Thank you very much indeed, Danny Kelly. You are a former BBC presenter.